From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
More details arrive about the FBI's raid on President Trump's home in Florida, as Attorney General Merrick Garland says that he personally approved the search. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley. Welcome to the end of a wild week in American politics. It began on Monday with this FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, and 5 days later, I think we still have more questions than we really have answers. On Thursday, Attorney General Merrick Garland made a brief public statement, and the biggest news of that event was that he said the Justice Department would ask a judge to unseal the warrant and the property receipt from the FBI's raid. President Trump has a copy of those documents, but has chosen not to release them. But then he said on Thursday night he would not oppose the Department of Justice's request. In fact, he would encourage disclosure here. So now we're waiting for the warrant to arrive. It's still not public as we tape this. I have the federal court records website. It's called Pacer up on my screen that I keep refreshing. People probably don't know that you have to pay for court records through Pacer. Every time I hit refresh, there's a little notice at the bottom saying there are 4 billable pages for this docket and 40 cents. I've been running up my bill, so sorry about that, Paul. But Kim, there are some details that are leaking out into the press. News organizations saying that they have seen the warrant, not that they've obtained it, but that they've viewed it. So what do we seem to be learning here?
What is being reported is that the warrant and the order that was issued by the judge gave the FBI the ability to search vast amounts of the Mar-a-Lago estate in search of documents that the government claims were there and should have been in their possession. Then we also have an inventory of some of the items that the FBI took away. This includes about 20 boxes of things, including a lot of things that you'd probably classify, or Donald Trump would probably classify, as sort of mementos or memorabilia of his time in office. But the headline is all that apparently there were 11 sets of documents that had different varying levels of classified stamped on the top of them. Now, this is interesting because Donald Trump's lawyers immediately came out and said that he had in fact declassified these particular documents before he left, and so they are not in fact classified anymore. There's a very interesting question about the president's power to declassify, which is quite broad. It's quite sweeping. We can talk a little bit more about that. But it is really interesting that in some ways, this could end up coming down to some novel legal questions about the declassification process.
And we should say that a lot of these news reports are also unconfirmed so far. So on Thursday night, there was a report in the Washington Post that suggested that the FBI, some of the documents they were looking for related to nuclear weapons. And that was about the extent of the allegation there. But let's listen to a Friday news conference. Here is Congressman Mike Turner, a Republican of Ohio. He is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee.
It depends on what the nuclear information is. You can say nuclear weapons, but there are things that are highly, highly classified. There's things that are not extremely classified, but are nonetheless classified. The other aspect with respect to access is we don't know what those documents are. I mean, I'm asking the same question you are. Attorney General Garland, Director Wray, if these things rise to the level of national security threats to which there's an immediate need to enter the residence of a former president, perhaps future candidate of president, the person who is, has run against Garland's boss, that should have a higher level of scrutiny, right? But just tell us.
The other element of this here, and again, a little bit unconfirmed so far, but there's news reports that part of the reason the FBI executed a search is because they began to have doubts that President Trump or his team, his staff, were being forthright about what documents were still in their possession. And so, Alicia, if you are trying to make the argument that the search was justified, defend the Justice Department here, I think that's it, that there was some national security information there and President Trump wasn't being forthright that he still had it.
Obviously, that's their argument. I mean, that's the impression that they want to give the public. Problem is they really haven't disclosed much information about this probe in itself, and we won't get the affidavit that actually provides more information about witnesses as well as the probable cause and the crimes that the government suspects that the Trump may have committed. It's all very hazy, as you mentioned, and it didn't return classified information. And now the Post Post is reporting about potentially those documents, classified documents, could have related to nuclear weapons. But again, nuclear weapons, well, are they the U.S. nuclear weapons? Could they have been related to the nuclear deal with Iran? We know that, the Trump was very involved in that. And the Journal actually reported that some of the documents that were removed from the property included some information on Macron. And we know that Trump was very irritated with Macron about his resistance to or pulling out of the nuclear agreement with Iran. So I think there's a lot of innuendo here. And I think that this kind of innuendo and the haziness of what the government is investigating benefits the Justice Department because it allows the media and other people to kind of run away with their own fantasies of what this whole investigation is about without actually having any concrete details. The search warrant will provide us, once it is released, will provide us with more, but still it will allow the government essentially to set the narrative and puts the onus again on the Trump administration to fill in some of the blanks. And I would hope that the Trump will be doing that, again, perhaps detailing exactly what information concerning Macron was removed so our imaginations don't go wild here.
But that's part of the difficulty here is if this is classified information, it's hard to even know how the public would be apprised of what it's about because it's classified information, Kim. And to your point about the declassification powers that the president has and the novel questions that might arise here, I mean, what if there is not any formal record of these materials being declassified, but President Trump's defense here is, I declassified all this stuff in the weeks or the months before I left office. I intended to take it with me. I mean, it raises the question of what exactly the president has to do to put that kind of declassification into effect. And, if a president declassifies some documents in the forest and without making a sound, then did it actually happen?
Yeah, so if you listen to the critics, and it's fascinating, of course, the minute that the statement came out from the president's lawyers saying, well, this is irrelevant because the president declassified these documents, of course, everybody began splitting along ideological lines again. And Trump critics, including a number of lawyers, were coming out making that argument that, no, there's a whole formal process for this, and you have to change the stamps. And if the stamps weren't changed and the markings weren't changed, then, no one else can touch these. And so they're still classified. I think here's a problem with that argument is that according to no less than the Supreme Court, the president has super huge, broad authority and power when it comes to classification. He is, in fact, the only government official who can classify and declassify information at will. In fact, anyone else who is going to declassify something has to have had that power delegated to them in some form or fashion by the president. In 1988, the Supreme Court, in a ruling called Department of Navy versus Egan, said, the president, after all, is the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. His authority to classify and control access to information bearing on national security flows primarily from his constitutional investment of power in the president. So people who are looking at this saying, okay, in fact, not only does the president have the ability to just say that is declassified, he also has the power to change the process by which it's declassified and just say, like, I no longer agree that this needs to go through this particular process. Could Merrick Garland really push on this and try to make a charge on this? Maybe, but, I don't know if I were Merrick Garland, that's really where I'd want to be staking my flag is on a kind of novel legal question about the limits of presidential declassification power.
And just to underline that, so there was a bit of a controversy in 2019 when President Trump tweeted what appeared to be a satellite surveillance photo of an accident at a space launch facility in Iran. And I don't know the process that he went through in order to do that. I've seen some criticism of that decision as unwise, letting people know, letting adversaries know the real capabilities of American surveillance satellites. But it seems plausible that maybe he got that photo in his briefing materials and he took a picture of it and he tweeted it. And as president, I guess, Alicia, that would be equivalent to declassifying it without going through some formal process. Maybe they did it after the fact.
I think that's right. And I think that's what's, again, contributing to the haziness of all this. To Kim's point, it's very plausible that some of these documents have been declassified or were declassified, maybe just Trump. And we don't actually even know if Trump could have declassified it if he had just said, I ordered these declassified, if he actually wrote a memo. We don't have this information. So we're relying on the National Archives and what they said and what the DOJ officials have intimated in their leaks to the media. But we really don't know. And so we're kind of left meandering in the dark here. And again, I think that both the Trump and DOJ this is a disservice to us, the country, Americans. One or the other needs to clear up. To some extent, I take your point that some of the information, what is classified, you can't exactly detail that, but you can provide, broad contours to the public about what was in these without actually providing the very granular details that would make the information classified, so to speak.